News and notes from 12 different spring games, SMU, Clemson, Auburn, NC State, and more after the stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 33 of Good Morning College Football. I am Nicholas Iannell, CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us today after an action-packed weekend across the sports world, basically. One national champion crowned in college basketball, another on the way tonight. Even more news coming out of that sport, perhaps overshadowing it. A lot of folks up on my timeline apparently paying close attention to WrestleMania. But of course, the most important item that we will discuss, and we'll save the best for last, but we're talking about the Ball State spring game, which happened over the weekend. There were about a dozen spring games in total across FBS college football, and then dozens of scrimmages elsewhere. And for today's show, we are going to concentrate on those spring games. But before we do that, if this is your first time joining us, thank you very much for giving this video a like on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Thank you for subscribing to that channel. And we very much would appreciate your support at CampusToCanton.com. If you like the work that we do here, if you like this show, if you enjoy reading in depth about college football, the Campus to Canton form of fantasy football, which of course encompasses both college and NFL players. If you'd like to join our Discord community where folks are in there talking college and NFL football and a wide range of things all day, every day, you can join for as little as $2.99 per month. And if you're interested in some of the things that we discuss here on this show a lot, our returning production database, where we have team pages for all 134 FBS teams. You can see who's coming back, who's not, transferring in, transferring out, losing guys to eligibility and injuries, things of that nature. That's available to our All 22 and C2C Winning Edge tier members. And then the next big thing on the list, we're still shooting for a May 1st publish date of our 2024 CFB Winning Edge team profiles. And that's the biggest project I work on each year. This will be our sixth edition, I believe, maybe seventh. Started in 2018. And that includes also team pages of all FBS teams. We'll have 135 this year, including Delaware and Kennesaw State, who's officially an FBS team this year. Delaware, we're putting in a year early. But we've got power rankings, depth chart projections, injury reports, more transfer and recruiting information, projected point spreads in our three different power rating models. Just as much information as you could hope for. We try to put it all in one place in our team profiles, which will be available again in May to our All 22 and C2C Winning Edge tier members. Now, with that out of the way, time to talk a little bit of spring football. And we're focusing, like I said, on the spring games today. We'll have more scrimmage notes and other items of interest on Wednesday. I expect on Friday we'll be able to go a little more in depth on our Big Ten preseason team strength power rankings, similar to what we did for the SEC last week. But again, today, spring games getting most of the attention. And usually I try to go through and if I get a piece of information from one author from one site, I'll try to make sure to put this quote to this person and this observation to this person today, just because there's so many different things coming out and I read so many different observations. I'm going to try to cite the sources up front. So there might be, two newspapers, a team site, another bit of information, pulled from some other source. Try to put that all up front. And so, after that, then it'll be kind of some of them mixed together a little bit. But of course, as always, thank you so much to the folks out there who are going out and working hard for this information, covering these teams. My personal spring game intake doesn't really start in full swing until the summer. So most everything that we'll talk about here today is what has been reported, what has been written about, observed by others. I'll catch a piece of a game here and there, an SEC network game or something like that. But I usually don't sit down and just put my entire focus on a spring game until mostly they're all wrapped up. So I'll have more, rewatches and observations, I'm sure, as we get into the later months of the off season. But for now, these are coming from mostly beat reporters, other folks who cover and observe these teams professionally. But some I know are Ethan Sowers from Campus Canton had a nice trio of observations that he tweeted out about the NC State spring game, and definitely passed those along as well. But starting with SMU, Jordan Hofeditz and Billy Embody of On the Pony Express both wrote a good bit about the SMU spring game, where they played on Friday night. That's why we're starting there in Dallas. The game itself was held at Highland Park's Highlander Stadium, so not the typical home field for the Mustangs, but a crowd of about 1,000 was on hand, and perhaps most importantly to SMU as it prepares for its first season in the ACC, a large group of recruits were on hand. So important to, spring games across the country are important recruiting activities, give it an opportunity to see the team, up close, interact with coaches and players, things like that. And SMU certainly no different. And that was something that was pointed out, was the large number and good showing of recruits who were on the sidelines or there in the stadium for the spring game. Starting quarterback Preston Stone, who was recently cleared for football activity, and basically 100%, it sounds like, which we discussed last week, did not play in the spring game. So with that in mind, probably not a big surprise that the defense dominated, but there were a few offensive standouts. A couple of wide receivers, Jake Bailey, very solid. Sounds like he had some nice catches over the middle. Looks like he is perhaps in line to be that top target again this year for SMU. Moochie Dixon, also wide receiver, made a few more exciting plays, was credited with having the catch of the night on a big play. But Camar Wheaton, the running back, former 5-star recruit, who's not quite lived up to that potential, and certainly is a very talented, very fast running back, and that speed was on display. He had a 54-yard touchdown run, outran the SMU defense, was called the offensive highlight of the night on a spring game that didn't have too many big plays. But Bailey, as we mentioned, showed his ability to make third down catches, move the chains, and the major perhaps issue for why the offense struggled a little bit, the offensive line is an area where SMU lacks depth. They had a couple of starters transfer out. They've had a couple of injuries. They're just, the amount of movement at that particular position from year to year is just not, in the best place. And SMU did divide up their teams somewhat evenly. So it wasn't like, first team offensive line versus first team defensive line. It was a little bit more of a mix. So you have, what should be a pretty decent starting group. And head coach Rhett Lashley noted that as well. But when you're limited by injury, when you're probably waiting on a transfer or two, I know they got a commitment from an offensive line transfer last week. There's going to be an opportunity for that lack of depth to show up. when you're kind of splitting that offensive line as starters across two different units and then backups where you're a little bit limited. Those guys getting a lot of reps in the spring game perhaps is going to show up a little bit. Especially with the defense, where the defensive line should be strength of this team. So a few quotes here passed along from Rhett Lashley after the spring game said, quote, "We did make some plays. Camar had a great run. We had some catches down the field. It'll be great when we get our O-line healthy and we can kind of get intact." He was asked about, will SMU be aggressive in the transfer portal? Me speculating, offensive lines probably an area where we would expect SMU to try to add another name or two, potentially even somebody who can come in and play significant snaps. But Lashley said, quote, "We feel good about our culture and our roster and the guys here, and they have a good time together, but it's a new day in college football. April 16th, that opens up, and we'll see who's going to be here, and I hope most of them are. I think they will be. We've got a few spots we can fill, and it will be nice to get into May and kind of start to slowly have a good idea of who's going to be on our roster." Another area of some concern defensively is the cornerback position. On the Pony Express has highlighted a lot this spring that quarterback looks like the biggest question mark on the roster. Both starters from last season are gone, and so far this spring, no one really has emerged to lock down either of those starting spots. But there was a lot of positive buzz about A.J. Davis, including in the spring game. So we'll keep an eye on SMU, their team, of course, moving up from the American Conference to the ACC. Expect that they are going to be very, very competitive in year one. But last year, a lot of those teams that moved up to the Big 12 really struggled. So I'm curious to see if SMU is going to have a similar transition where perhaps very talented roster, at least as far as the starting projected depth chart goes, but maybe the lack of depth and offensive line and in the secondary right now seem like perhaps those areas where depth is the biggest concern. Will that wear on them over the course of the season? And when you're playing a more talented, deeper opponent week to week, will that wear? I'm not sure. We'll see. SMU is a team that I'm going to be very, very interested to see what we can learn on with that sort of thing in mind as we look ahead. SMU's new ACC counterpart, rival, maybe not quite yet, but another important ACC member, perhaps the preseason favorite in the eyes of some. We'll have ACC power rankings in a week or two, but along with Florida State, along with a team like NC State, who I think has the ability to surprise. North Carolina, we talked about last week, as maybe being a little bit underrated by most folks right now. Our numbers seem to like them early on in our team profile work and our power rankings as they stand right now. But Clemson is still certainly one of the teams to beat and expected to compete for the ACC championship. And Darian Carter of Greenville News, Will Vandervoort working for the State, wide variety of team sites as well, of course, were on hand for the Clemson spring game in front of about 47,000 in attendance on Saturday at Memorial Stadium. The orange team played the white team and came out with a 27-12 victory, in large part due to the defense. The quarterbacks were not live. There was a little bit of a quick whistle when it came to calling sacks, but the orange team had 14 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, and a pick 6, which all were a part of that winning performance. Early in the game, one of the stars of the spring, freshman wide receiver Bryan Wesco Jr., made quite a nice over-the-shoulder catch for a 9-yard touchdown pass. He was on the winning team, and then not long after, Jamal Anderson Jr. returned an interception of quarterback Christopher Vizina for a touchdown. Cade Klubnik was hit or miss a little bit. I think that's fair to say. Did look shaky. Did lead a 15-play, 75-yard touchdown drive in the second quarter. A very time-consuming drive, according to Carter. Took off more than 7 minutes of game time. He did find Peyton Straco for a 5-yard touchdown that set up a 5-yard pass that got to the goal line, set up a 1-yard touchdown run to increase the lead. But the most impressive quarterback of the day was walk-on Trent Pearman, who did play for both teams, so had more of an opportunity to put up big numbers. But he had a 57-yard touchdown drive in the first quarter. Also had ended up with 141 yards on 13 of 18 passing, 2 touchdowns, as it sounds like. And Klubnik did see a note, didn't see much follow-up on this, so I'll have to check in, dig a little deeper. Sounds like Klubnik got a little bit banged up potentially in this game. Certainly, hopefully, nothing serious. I expect we would have heard much more about it if it were. But as we talked about a little bit last week, Clemson was somewhat shorthanded. Had some key players down. The wide receiver position was limited by injuries for a good bit this spring, and that certainly could be a factor as to why Klubnik maybe didn't have his best day. But Peter Woods, defensive lineman, was out. He's been dealing with an injury, with an illness, not a traditional injury, but with him on the sideline, it allowed some other young players to step up and get significant reps there, and sounds like it really paid off. Quite a few freshmen had strong performances, not just Wesco on offense, but Stephen Green had 4 sacks. Cade Dinoff had 2 tackles for loss and a pass deflection, and AJ Hoffler had a sack and a pass deflection. So a lot of young, talented Clemson players with an opportunity to show what they could do, and perhaps emerge, take advantage of that extra opportunity to become contributors this fall. We'll see how that shakes out. Another standout true freshman at Auburn, Cam Coleman, somebody we've talked about a bit this spring, the 5-star wideout, won MVP honors. So, there's been a lot of discussion of true freshman wide receivers so far this year, Wesco being one of the performers, not only of the spring game, but of the spring itself, I think, at Clemson. We've talked about Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. There have been others elsewhere, but Cam Coleman might potentially have the biggest impact of any single receiver, from a freshman standpoint on his offense in 2024. That probably was a little bit of a weird way to put it, but this Auburn passing attack struggled a bit, and Payton Thorne, the quarterback, there's been some question, will he be able to hold on to this job? Some folks wondering why Auburn hasn't been more aggressive to try to upgrade at the quarterback position. We talked a little bit about some of the tweaks that the coaching staff has made to the RPO process, and what, how Thorne is going to treat those plays. And it sounds like that's paying off with, more comfortability and just confidence for the quarterback, and then getting a, full off season and a spring, which he didn't have last year, has been big for Thorne. But maybe the biggest thing is he can throw it to Cam Coleman now. And Coleman had 92 receiving yards on 4 catches, had a 34-yard touchdown catch from Thorne, also made a spectacular play laying out on another big play. And he wasn't the only wide receiver who looked good on Saturday. Georgia State transfer Robert Lewis also came up big. He's been getting rave reviews from quarterbacks and fellow teammates as well. But Coleman is really seems like the star in the future. Head coach Hugh Freeze, and all these reports are coming from Nathan King of Auburn Undercover and Ansley Lee of AL.com. Coach Hugh Freeze said, quote, "I think he changes us. He just thinks every ball is catchable." And, on that had the 40-yard full layout catch early in the game, but then also made a big play on tight coverage to pick up a low pass for a touchdown. And he and Lewis combined for 165 yards on 9 receptions. The trio accounted for plays of 40, 49, and 34 yards. So getting those two newcomers, Cam Coleman, whose raw talent is exceptional, Lewis, who's played a lot of football and been productive at the Division I level already, taking a step up in his level of competition. Those two guys, along with newcomer Sam Jackson V, who was a starting quarterback for Cal last year at times, who also played pretty well in the spring game. A lot more for Payton Thorne to work with. So if that Auburn wide receiver core, really comes together, and it sounds like, according to King and Lee, perhaps Auburn isn't done adding to that group. Receiver could be an area where the Tigers look to upgrade in the transfer portal later this spring. But I think personally, I've said this before on this show, but the Auburn passing attack I expect to be improved. I expect Thorne to look better, to the naked eye, but also statistically as well. And, will a true freshman like Cam Coleman truly step up and become, one of the best receivers, not only on the team, but quickly emerge, in the SEC? Too early for me to say. I've said plenty. I'm not a real big recruiting guy, so my knowledge base and understanding of Cam Coleman is fairly shallow, especially when you compare it to the recruiting team at Campus to Canton. And I do suggest reading the freshman guide when you get a chance. But there's opportunity for Auburn. There's opportunity for Coleman in that Auburn offense to emerge quickly and become productive. So very curious to see how that all plays out. Caleb Burton III and Coy Moore, both of whom were expected to compete for starting roles, still may have been injured this spring, did not play. Camden Brown was hampered by a hamstring injury most of the spring, but was able to participate. He had 3 catches for 45 yards, including 25 yards after the catch, according to reports. Daniel Locke of Auburn Daily had a few stats from quarterbacks. Thorne went 9 for 13 for 133 yards. The only touchdown, he was responsible for the only passing touchdown. Auburn really struggled in the red zone, was a big piece of it. Towns McGough, who ended up kicking a 58-yard field goal to give the offense a 28-27 victory. That was his 6th field goal of the day after 5 drives for the Tigers stalled inside the red zone. But Thorne also did have 27 yards rushing. It, of course, is worth noting that he was not live it's always a little tricky. Any spring stats or take them with a grain of salt. But rushing yards for a quarterback, yeah, definitely take those for a grain of salt. Buddy ended up as the leading rusher with 27 yards. Hank Brown was just 5 of 12 for 103 yards, but he did connect with Coleman on a 49-yard pass, which was the longest pass of the day. Brown, it was also noted by Locke, was the only Auburn quarterback not to take a sack in the game. At NC State, there's a new quarterback in town, Grayson McCall, longtime starter at Coastal Carolina, has come in, solidified the job, and really, it sounds like he and what is rounded into a pretty decent quarterback group altogether. This NC State passing attack looks like it is going to be taking a step forward. Head coach Dave Doran said after the spring game, quote, "It was a good day throwing and catching the football. It's a lot different when you're not just trying to figure out ways to get KC Kevin Concepcion, Casey Concepcion, the ball. There's a lot more things we can do with the ball now on offense. So that has to be, so that was fun to see. And that quote coming from Ethan McDowell of the Wolfpacker. So the red team, which sounds like maybe it had more starters than the other, combined for 429 yards. McCall had over 200 of that, was 16 of 20 passing in the game, according to McDowell. Doran said that the staff kept things pretty vanilla on offense. That word was used probably every spring game. Every head coach, everybody who was quoted mentioned that the offense was pretty vanilla. But still, the stats in their raw form look pretty good for the NC State passing attack. Cedric Bailey and Lex Thomas combined for 287 yards. Bailey also had a 50-plus yard run. Thomas completed a 90-yard touchdown pass to Wesley Grimes, the Wake Forest transfer. Those two go back a long time, apparently childhood friends, and Grimes was actually playing for both teams in this game, but it sounded like, according to McDowell, had just the one catch, but the 90 yards for a touchdown. And one of the big performers at wide receiver was Noah Rogers, the transfer from Ohio State, who led the team with 133 yards on 7 catches, was very involved, according to McDowell, created separation on deep routes and made contact catches over the middle. Dave Doran said afterward, "You can't hide his athleticism. He makes plays." The running game, group of running backs, is improved deeper at NC State this year. Jordan Walters looks like the starter. He had 69 yards on 7 attempts, including a 23-yard touchdown run in the second quarter. Sophomore Kendrick Raphael was the number 2 running back, the first player off the bench for the red team. He and Hollywood Smothers both played quite a bit. Raphael finished with 39 rushing yards. Smothers had 75 on 8 carries. And Ethan Sowers of Campus to Canton tweeted out some observations from his takeaways from the game. Said, quoting here a thread of tweets, and I expect Ethan's going to be adding to these the deeper he digs into spring games over the coming weeks. But NC State's offense looks really good. McCall looks like he's in rhythm and has a decent understanding of his progressions. Was surprised at how heavy they ran it in the spring game, but Jordan Waters seems like a de facto CFF weapon. Justin Jolly is absolutely the tight end they'll use the most, despite my Juice Farine love. The wide receivers all look solid. Concepcion won't have the same target share as last year, period. What that means to his value is TBD. Rogers and Grimes both looked improved. Cedric Bailey is going to be a name that you'll hear a lot in the next week or so, in my opinion. He looked explosive as a runner and poised in the pocket. NC State's gone portal hunting for a QB the last few years, but I cautiously think the QB of tomorrow is Bailey. At Southern Miss, Scott Watkins of the Sun Herald had some quotes from head coach Will Hall, who said, "It's time to win, point blank. Everybody within these walls knows that. That's what we're focusing on every day." And one of the big questions for Southern Miss is, what quarterback gives them the best chance to win. Most expect that Tate Rodemaker, the transfer coming in from Florida State, is the QB to beat, likely to take over as a starter. But Ethan Crawford, according to Watkins, was the most impressive quarterback in the spring game. Crawford, it sounds like, led the first touchdown drive of the day, showcased his elusiveness by evading a sack early on the drive, and then his arm when he struck a wide open Chandler Pittman for a 50-yard touchdown. Crawford, quoted here by Watkins, said, "I just play with my heart. Every time I step on the field, I feel like there's nobody that can stop me. Any situation I put myself in, I'm prepared for. I worked so hard to come back this spring. I want it too bad to let anybody think they're going to beat me over. I worked for this moment." Crawford not only competing with Rodemaker, but also Billy Wiles, who was the starter And it sounds like those two, perhaps among the 4 quarterbacks who got extensive work, were maybe the two least impressive, at least in the spring game. True freshman John White was a standout, according to Watkins. The early enrollee led the only other full field touchdown drive, completing passes of 26, 18, and 19 yards before connecting with Jack Johnson for a 6-yard score. Those just stats from a spring game. I'm not sure what the makeup of the defense that he was playing against, but when a head coach calls back another, and maybe the best quarterback he has been in contact with in the past, you do pay attention. So there was a quote here from Hall where White, here quoting, has been as sharp as any true freshman I've ever coached besides Michael Pratt, a former Tulane quarterback there. Michael Pratt, according to Will Hall, maybe the only QB who's been better as a true freshman at this point in his very, very, very early college career. But he continued, said he's very similar to Pratt in how he came in and just picked it up. From the first practice, he seems like a college quarterback. He doesn't seem like a true freshman. He's very cerebral, extremely accurate. He can run. Another name of note, 6'5" wide receiver J.J. Butler had a good day. Sounds like he is developing into a potential contributor for the Eagles. Hall said, quote, I think he can be one, it says a go-to target one day. I think he's growing into that role. JJ is a really good football player. This is his first spring. He gets better every day. He's been thrown into the fire, and he's embraced competition. So keep an eye out for that Southern Miss quarterback competition. Sounds like it's perhaps a little more crowded than we even expected. Sam Sklar of the Hattiesburg American also had some reaction to the spring game, but dug a little bit more in with Hall. And as we talked about briefly earlier in previous episodes of Good Morning College Football, Hall is really, really embracing the NIL, the collective there in Hattiesburg, and that sounds like it was part of the spring game that Hall was mic'd up during the scrimmage to the loudspeakers. He also, at the end of the day, gave a speech to the crowd that thanked everybody for coming, wants to make sure they purchase season tickets, but then also gave a shout out to the top collective there at Southern Miss, who they've really tried to ramp that up. And I'm not sure all the details, but Southern Miss didn't get hit extremely hard by guys leaving through the transfer portal. So perhaps that there's some connection there. But will Southern Miss be able to go out and bring in some transfers to kind of add to whatever the makeup of skill position talent is around that starting quarterback, whoever it ends up being? Curious to see. But as Sklar noted here from Hall, quoted him saying, there's an extreme sense of urgency in the program that starts with me every day. So Will Hall is one of those head coaches, I think, is probably on a pretty warm seat at this point, coming off a disappointing season last year when that program had looked like it was on an upward trajectory early in his tenure. At UAB, Evan Dudley of AL.com had a rundown with a lot of stats of the Blazers' spring game. Starting quarterback Jacob Zeno took most of the snaps. He was 15 of 21 for 147 yards and an interception. Did have a rushing touchdown, but was sacked 5 times. Without a doubt, the star of the game, according to Dudley, was Cam Shanks, who was a wide receiver that Dudley actually profiled earlier in the week. Expected to take a big jump this year and is a real speedster, but also big-time playmaker. Redshirt freshman, had 6 receptions for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns in the spring game. His TD receptions were both over 30 yards, 37 and 33. And Dudley described him as his legendary speed was on display throughout the scrimmage. So keep that in note as you're trying to keep that in mind as you're trying to figure out the pecking order of the UAB wide receiver group, because of course last season Amari Thomas broke through, and he is back. Led the team with 9 receptions during the spring game. Those went for 80 yards and a touchdown. Redshirt freshman Corey Milliner had 2 catches for 85 yards. TJ Jones, 2 catches for 41 yards, I should say. Tight end Bryce Stamus brought in a 35-yard reception, and Brandon Buckhalter, 2 catches, 28 yards, and a touchdown. Also ran 41 yards on a reverse. So a lot of, racked up the yardage there for UAB. But despite all those, receiving yards totals, according to Dudley, the Blazers focused more on the running game, while Zeno was under center. But Landry Liddy and Trace Campbell, the backup quarterbacks, both looked good. Liddy 5 for 5 for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns, about as good as it gets. Campbell 5 of 7, 88 yards and 2 scores. The running back rotation, Lee Beebe and Lee Witherspoon split those duties, combined for 146 yards and a touchdown. Both players had 10 carries. Dylan Peterson added 13 yards and a touchdown. He had 5 attempts. And then I always, take note, is there a tight end out there who's getting some carries at UAB? Terrell McDonald had a 37-yard gain after lining up in the backfield in the third series. So just keep that in mind. All right, moving further west at New Mexico State, Sam Guzman of KTSM9 and Sam Reeder of the Albuquerque Journal had some reactions from the Aggies spring game. Guzman noted that, throughout the spring, the offense was considered to have been ahead of the defense, and New Mexico State has a lot of experience coming back on offense just about everywhere but quarterback. But the defense was the winner, it sounded like, on Saturday, and perhaps they benefited from a very, very windy day where it sounds like the winds were steady over 20 miles an hour and into the 30s at times. But quoting New Mexico State head coach Tony Sanchez here, he said, "We've been really explosive on offense throughout the course of the spring, but it was good to see the defense step up. It started off really good when we started with the goal line right away. They were really, really physical on a player here, starting safety, New Mexico State's Dylan Early said, on the defensive side of the ball, it was all energetic. We had a lot of energy flowing through. So that led to us playing first and to the shutdown defense today. The biggest question, of course, for New Mexico State, who is the quarterback going to be? The reports were that Deuce Hogan, Parker Awad, Brandon Nunez, and Jeff Davidson all shared reps at the QB spot. The competition sounds like it's nowhere close to being finalized. Hogan, according to most, is expected to eventually win out, but he was not the player who had the best day, according to Ryder. Said that with no official stats and mostly even reps among the top 3, Hogan, Nunez, and Awad, and then the shifting personnel. And he said, as an example, Hogan received reps with the second team offensive line, Nunez with the third, etc. Awad probably had the most productive day, throwing a pair of touchdowns against what looked like the third team defense. So, stats always, in the spring, be careful. But at least according to one person who was there and saw it up close with a critical eye, Awad, perhaps the best of the quarterbacks for New Mexico State on Saturday. Sanchez quoted here, the biggest question mark for us is at that quarterback spot and letting those guys battle it out. They all got even reps. They got to play with the ones. They got to play with the twos, play with the threes. We're not 100% where we want to be going into the season, but we got a lot of time to do that. Summer work is going to be important for those guys. So New Mexico State, they're a team that intrigues me, have really been impressed, of course, with what Jerry Kill did the last couple of years. He's a miracle worker. New Mexico State is a really, really tough place to win consistently. And there's a lot coming back. That offense should be quite good running the football. Sounds like the system basically in place, even though, there's a new offensive coordinator, sort of continuity within that coaching staff on that side of the ball. The defense had been a little bit of a question mark most of the spring. They are unveiling a totally new defense. So brought in a new coordinator who is installing a new scheme. So perhaps that had something to do with the struggles a little bit early on. Did they benefit from a very windy day, or did the defense step up and look better? I'll be curious to see how it all shakes out. But at Tulsa, Mike McGowan for the Tulsa World and Larry Lewis of Inside Tulsa Sports had a lot of information from the Golden Hurricanes spring scrimmage on Saturday at Chapman Stadium. So the offense made some plays, and there were some interesting notes, I think, of offensive players, but the defense was the most discussed from these two particular reports. So it was also, it sounds like a little bit hard to, wasn't a traditional spring game, was more situational. I believe it was Lewis who noted that a unique aspect of Tulsa's spring game was that the offense didn't necessarily continue a drive after a first down in scoring territory. It was situational, starting drives from different yard lines. For example, when Bill Jackson broke off a 46-yard run where he was tackled at the 10-yard line, that series was immediately ended. So it sounds like, the coaches probably had a script where, okay, on, P and 10, we're at the negative 45, or even farther back, I would assume, have a play, then spot the ball 15 yards ahead of it the next time, then spot the play 10 yards ahead the next time, switch hashes, all that good stuff. So that probably, it sounds like, maybe is what was going on there. But it can get even more difficult to read on stats and things like that, touchdowns, especially if you're taking the ball from what would have been a red zone or goal to go situation and bring it back to the 50 or whatever. But one thing that had escaped my notice earlier this spring, and this time last year, there was a little bit of buzz for Malachi Jones as the top returning wide receiver at Tulsa. Seemed like he was in position for a pretty good year, struggled with injuries and just otherwise wasn't quite able to break through. He has since moved to defense. Sounds like safety, according to reports, and had a pretty good spring game. Sounds like it was mostly his idea. The wide receiver group is deeper than it was. That seems like a strength on paper this go round. And Jones sounded like he could make a bigger impact on the defensive side of the ball. So, quoting here, he said, I feel like the defense had a great day today. Spring has been very good on our part. Obviously, I'm very new to defense. I already know what a great defense looks like in terms of practice. He continued on a little later. It's hard to switch. I just kind of bet on myself. I don't want to have any regrets when I'm done playing the game. I just wanted to take a shot at it. I didn't want to be talking about it. I know I'm athletic, so I wanted to make a smooth transition to where it looked like I've been playing for a few years. Jones had just 9 catches, 113 yards in 2023, but sounds like made a couple of nice plays during the spring scrimmage. Another defender of note who was impressive is incoming transfer Miles Jackson, listed at 6'2", 250 pounds. Going to be an edge defender, the jack position in the defense for Tulsa, which is kind of a hybrid defensive end linebacker spot. Jackson began his career Tulsa is his third spot. I forget exactly where he started, but was most recently at Indiana. And head coach Kevin Wilson, quoted here, said, Indiana wanted him to stay. He's been a role player. He wanted to be a feature player. He thought if he came here, he could have an impact like Ben Kapinski had last year, and he's got a chance. He's a different player from Ben. He's strong. He's a great kid. As a late add, he's one of our better leaders. He's one of our better players. I think he's got a chance to be very positive and strong influence on the team. Back to the offensive side of the ball and the quarterback position. Kirk Francis, the redshirt freshman, has gotten most first-team reps this spring. He finished the season strong, got an opportunity to play somewhat unexpectedly at the end of 2023. Former walk-on has gotten a lot of the first-team reps this spring. Stephen Kittleman got most of the second-team reps during the spring game because Cardell Williams, who was throwing some in practice Saturday before the scrimmage, but has been held out of live practice due to recovering from injury that ended his season early in 2023. It sounds like Francis has taken advantage of the opportunity. Though the numbers weren't great, completed 10 of 22 passes for 106 yards and no interceptions unofficially. Kettleman, much better, 18 for 25 for 215 yards and a TD pass, was also intercepted, but had a 32-yard run that was whistled early, so could have been an even longer gain there. But, and I believe this was Lewis who said this for Inside Tulsa Sports, where I lost my place there. As for Francis, he seems entrenched already as Tulsa's quarterback. So not an official declaration there. Sounds like we won't get one anytime soon, but that seems to be the opinion of someone who is very close to this team and has seen how it is sort of shaped up after last season, but also into the spring as well. An item that really caught my eye, and this sounds maybe like a silly thing, but Braylon Presley, a transfer from Oklahoma State, small but incredibly athletic. It sounds like he's also put on some good weight, gotten stronger. Kind of disappointed a little bit last season. Weren't sure if he was going to, play at running back or receiver, and had some issues with drops. But it sounds like perhaps at least part of his struggles there, where he couldn't see very well. Presley apparently has known he's had bad vision for a little while, but didn't really wear his contact lenses. Sounds like that is no longer the case, which this, again, sounds, so what, big deal. And this is a very, very small, sample, but I had a little bit of experience long ago, my short-lived high school coaching career. We had a really talented receiver who just couldn't seem to put it together. And one day we happened to notice, I don't think he could see, just squinting, couldn't really focus. Got him some contacts, and it was like he was a completely different player. So Presley, already very, very talented. I'm curious to see. This is something that it sounds very, small to most folks, but could have a big impact potentially. So I'm excited to see if Presley's going to be able to catch the ball a little bit better, and that'll lead to more confidence and just more playmaking ability. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But great note from Lewis there that I do think is worth remembering. At North Texas, Breck Vito of the Denton Record Chronicle was on hand for a spring game that by most expectations did not include the Mean Green's starting quarterback this year. Chandler Morris will enroll this summer in Denton, but it sounds like Stone Earl has put himself in position to compete for that job. Earl was credited with 214 yards and a touchdown on 17 of 22 passing. He had a 14-yard TD to Central Oklahoma transfer Oscar Hammond, who finished with 4 catches for 60 yards. Hammond, it sounds like, has had a really nice spring, a name to perhaps write down and file away. The quarterback position as a whole performed pretty well, even without Chandler Morris. Cash McCollum, a early enrollee true freshman, had 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Morris was quoted after the spring game saying, "Cash reminds me a lot of the guy from Memphis," talking about Ryan Hannigan. Says their bodies are similar and they're both coaches' kids, which is something that I like to note whenever that information comes up. But Morris, speaking about Chandler Morris, which I don't believe there's any relations here, afterwards said Chandler is proven. He won that job 2 times at a big institution and had some tough luck injury-wise. He's a coach's kid. He's been around it his whole life and is a winner. He's proven that everywhere he's played. Stone has stayed, battled, and worked on his throwing motion. It'll be fun to see those guys compete over the summer. One thing that Morris alluded to also, it was 120 or so play scrimmage. There were, some guys held out as there are always. There were some improvements defensively, which was a major issue for North Texas last year. But Morris, it sounds like, even though there's a ton of turnover, North Texas ranks pretty low in our returning production numbers at CFP Winning Edge, C2C Winning Edge. The quote here finishing says, "It feels like our team now. The majority of the guys we recruited. There was a huge roster turnover. The cohesiveness and togetherness in the locker room is different from last year." So as college football changes, returning production seems like it's still important, especially on the extremes. I obviously put a lot of time and effort into that, and our team at Campus to Canton has been incredibly helpful with that. So we think it's important, but there's some situations where perhaps even a team that's fairly low in those returning production numbers could end up being a little bit of addition by subtraction. At least, maybe that's how some would hope it will turn out. But I think there's a little bit in some cases of truth to that. So curious to see if North Texas is one of those. A couple of others here to finish before we spend a few minutes on Ball State as our team of the day. At UNLV, Mike Gramala of the Las Vegas Sun, Johnny Residez, and Jara Wright of KTNB 13 were on hand. The quarterback position, of course, is going to get the most discussion, and part of that is because the projected starter, Matthew Sluka, who's transferring in from Holy Cross, very productive FCS quarterback, very productive runner, most notably, was not on the field, at least not on the playing surface. He was on the sideline. He is not officially enrolled yet. He, like Morris, will be showing up in the spring, but without him, it allowed another FCS transfer, Haj Malik Williams, to go out and impress in front of a crowd of about 3,500 people. The final score, I'm not sure exactly what the scoring setup scenario was, but 64-53. Team Gray defeated Team White. But Haj Malik Williams won. Sounds like was part of a connection that another name of note, Damian McDaniel, true freshman who's only been on campus a couple of weeks, it sounds like. They had a 79-yard touchdown, which the overwhelming amount of that was due to McDaniel, who eluded the first defender and then turned on the Jets and outraced everyone to the end zone for a 79-yard touchdown, according to Gramala. Williams, who transferred in from Campbell, finished with 227 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, was 14 of 22 passing. Williams can also run a little bit. There has been some, thought, okay, Sluka's very experienced, like Williams, a multi-year starter, has played a lot, has been productive on the ground, but there's some question about his throwing ability. Williams putting up good numbers here, and senior receiver Ricky White, one of the best receivers in college football, was impressed, quoting here from the piece. He's a veteran, smart player, great ball. He can read a defense well, so he's going to be a great addition to us. White was also very complimentary of McDaniel, somebody who has sort of taken under his wing. Said, quote, "That's my guy. I'm trying to take him under my wing. Obviously, he's a freshman, so he's got a lot to learn, but he's going to be a heck of a player." Quarterback Cameron Friel was 11 of 17 for 116 yards and a touchdown. He was expected to be, number 2, number 3 in that quarterback competition. But if I'm sort of laying out how I expect it to go, I still would consider Sluka a slight favorite, but Williams not going to give up that job easy. But think that it's probably going to be one of those two, and I'd probably sit it at 60-40, maybe even 70-30 in Sluka's favor, but we shall see. And of course, from a college fantasy football standpoint, a lot of folks are interested in the running game there at UNLV. Very productive in raw terms, but sounds like it's going to be another running back by committee. A lot of the discussion afterwards was that 49 carries, 242 yards during the spring game, nearly 5 yards per carry, and a deep stable of backs. That included freshman Greg Burrell, who had a team-high 81 rushing yards on 10 carries. And quite a few others were in the mix as well. Plus, freshman Devin Green will be joining the group this summer, and he's one of the higher rated players in the upcoming, most recent, I should say, recruiting class. But a lot of the discussion afterward, quotes from Barry Odom, quotes from White, UNLV, the focus is winning a championship. So this team, which took a huge step forward in 2023, returns a lot of star power. I mean, with White leading the way, but added some talent as well. Feel like the quarterback situation is going to work itself out. Tony Grimes, 5-star transfer defensive back, made a couple of big pass breakups on long pass attempts. That UNLV team is very much in the mix for the Mountain West Championship. Boise State probably going to be the favorite, I would expect, but UNLV, don't be surprised if they're very close, number 2 when our power rankings come out and are official. Toledo, a team that I think is probably still going to be rated towards the top of the MAC, even though they have a lot of turnover. Kyle Rowland of the Blade was on hand for the Rockets spring game, where the talk of the day was Tucker Gleason, who is not officially the starting quarterback, at least according to Jason Candle so far. The head coach there is competing with John Allen Richter and RJ Johnson. Sounds like Richter is pretty firmly been the number 2 in spring so far, according to Rowland's reporting. But just about everybody, including Richter, via some quotes that Rowland passed along, expect that Tucker Gleason is going to be the starter. This is a quote from Richter, said, "It takes a lot of mental focus to prepare like you're the starter, even though maybe you're not the starter." I think that definitely takes a lot of focus from probably the film side, making sure if you get it done, you know what's going on. Gleason took the bulk of the reps with the first team offense this spring, according to Rowland, and that was the same case on Saturday. It was more of a traditional practice, actually, not a spring game, but wrapped up their spring practice, as did rival Bowling Green. Saw a news report out of Bowling Green as well, which has been without its top 2 quarterbacks in spring practice so far this year, but that has allowed extra reps for the sounds like all the reps, according to head coach Scott Loeffler, for Lucian, and we made it 58 minutes without Lucian Anderson III. There you go. Was a true freshman last year. Sounds like took every rep this spring, according to Scott Loeffler. So with Connor Bazelak and Camden North both sidelined following surgeries this spring, a lot of extra work there for Anderson. And finally, in our last 5 minutes or so, Ball State. And Ball State gets, some good coverage, certainly, from Kyle Smedley, Elijah Poe, both of the Ball State Daily News, the official Ball State roster, or team site, I should say. Also had a write-up on the spring game, but Kyle Kelly seemed like he had, really taken over as the quarterback at Ball State by the end of last year. He was the 3rd quarterback to get a start for Ball State. And Caden Simonza, who was a true freshman, started the season for Ball State. It seemed like Kelly had just eventually, by the end of the year, stepped in, played the best. Still not, spectacular passing numbers, certainly, but seemed like he had sort of solidified his spot atop that depth chart. But apparently, according to Smedley, that's not the case, at least so far this spring. Samanza took the majority of Ball State's Samanza took the majority of Ball State's first-team reps in the spring game. Kelly, it sounds like, still very much in the mix, was quoted in the piece by Poe talking about, what he brings to the table, including athleticism, was, seen doing cartwheels on the field beforehand. Also just a very positive person, good locker room presence, it sounds like. But, how did it go on the field? According to the reports and the one-on-one drills that were available to the public, both quarterbacks were, had some effective passes, but also overshot receivers in 11 on 11. It was a mix of good and bad, but both seemed inconsistent, according to Poe, I believe, mostly. But good news for both quarterbacks, especially if accuracy is a little bit of an issue. Size at receiver is a major strength for Ball State. Not only did tight end Tanner Koziel return, he had entered the transfer portal, briefly committed to Louisville, but returned to Ball State, was back for spring practice, went through, and seems like he's in line to be, maybe one of the top tight ends in the country, just from a pure production standpoint. I would expect he's 6'7", has had a lot of success and experience in the past. Brady Hunt, who was out last year with an injury, but has transferred to South Carolina, won't take targets away. So I expect Koziel to be a big part of this offense, but also Ty Robinson and Eastern Illinois transfer Justin Bowick, who had a touchdown on Saturday, are both 6'3" or taller, along with I just lost it. Sorry. But size at receiver, and that, Ball State last year, I remember thinking, and looking at our team profiles and how our position strength ratings shook out, had maybe the worst wide receiver group in the country on paper. Ty Robinson came in as a transfer, looked good early, but ended up getting injured. Eastern Illinois transfer Justin Bowick had 459 yards on 30 catches, 5 touchdowns last season. Seems like no longer will Ball State be on the extreme low end as far as talent at the receiver position. In fact, right now kind of looks a little bit like a strength. Do have to get the quarterback situation figured out. And Kelly last year ended up finishing ahead of Samanza in passing production, 577 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, did complete just 53.2% of his passes, did only average 4.7 yards per attempt, which is, less than half of what you want. But Samanza, really wasn't much better passing-wise. Averaged 5.9 yards per attempt, had 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, did complete 61% of his passes, did only play 4 games, so was able to preserve his red shirt. But, Kelly's biggest asset is his running ability. He finished with 723 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns, led the team. Will there be a role for both? I think that is possible. The name that slipped my mind earlier, my apologies to Quinn Magwood, who was the team's leading receiver, had 41 catches, 358 yards, just 1 touchdown last season. Koziel led the team with 3 touchdowns. So a lot of room for improvement in that passing game. But, the offensive line is a work in progress. 2 full-time starters are gone to eligibility. A third is gone out through the transfer portal. That's Corey Stewart, headed to the Big Ten. But 4 players are back who did start games up front. But the defense has a lot of work to do. Ball State right now in our returning production numbers ranks 129th in our adjusted defensive returning production. Do get their top tackler, Kalani Newsome, back. He had an interesting quote in the aftermath of the spring game, but the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players are gone. And then after one, Tylen Baldwin, who played 11 games as a defensive back last year, had 30 tackles, he returns, and then the next 4 tackles are gone. Most of those due to eligibility, but a couple of transfers out as well. Jordan Riley, Tyler Potts, Red Potts among them. Ball State has a lot of work to do. Last year was a disappointment. They do lose leading rusher Marquez Cooper, who had over 1,000 rushing yards, just 4 touchdowns on 227 carries, but has had a lot of success in the MAC, had transferred in from Kent State. I saw a tweet, was taking an official visit to UTEP. There's been a lot of speculation. Would he end up at San Diego State, where Sean Lewis, his former Kent State head coach, is? Curious to see, is there a potential that he could come back like Koziel did? Unclear. But Ball State is a team that I want to be optimistic about. Mike New has done some really good things there. He's made some changes. There's a new defensive system in play, and it sounds like a little bit of a concern in the write-up from Smedley, where said through this new look defense, linebacker Keontae Newsome said communication runs through the safeties, all of which are new starters for Ball State. The linebacker said communication has been a struggle at times throughout early practices, particularly with pre-snap and post-snap adjustments. Quote, it's been rough at times. So got to get that figured out. There's also a new offensive play caller. Was an internal promotion from previous tight end coach Jared Elliott, is still coaching the tight ends, but has taken over as the primary play caller from former co-offensive coordinator Kevin Lynch. So a little more continuity on the offensive side of the ball, where there's still plenty to get figured out, especially the quarterback position. But this Ball State team, I want to think, and I have liked Kelly in the past. I think that even if Samanza ends up stepping up and being the starter, the experience he gained as a true freshman last season will pay off. Sounds like there's some positive momentum in the receiving core, but it's going to be tough for Ball State. They do play on the road at Miami in week 2, get Missouri State to start. Missouri State, pretty decent FCS team traditionally, but also 3 straight road games at Miami, at Central Michigan to start MAC play, at James Madison, who's very, very low in returning production, but probably expect Ball State to be a decent underdog there. They do host Western Michigan, then at Kent State in October, so do get some early MAC opportunities. 3 of their first 6 games are actually conference games, a little bit rare there. Do take a trip to Vanderbilt in October. Not an unwinnable game, but expect that they'll probably be an underdog there as well. Home against Northern Illinois to close out the month of October, then get that week off prior to action really ramping up, and it's a very, very tough month of November for Ball State. Home against defending MAC champs Miami of Ohio, at Buffalo, another new look team, but consistently pretty talented for MAC standards, certainly. Home against Bowling Green, who I expect to be top 3 in our MAC power rankings, and then at Ohio, who has a lot of turnover, but consistently, consistent. I could just say that. One of the most consistent programs in the MAC. So any MAC team that we've discussed as our team of the day and sort of previewing, I'm sure we'll beat this dead horse quite a bit. The gap between the best team and the worst team in the MAC is not very much. Ball State could end up being very competitive. They could end up getting things to gel, especially if Kelly or Samanza steps up and becomes one of those takes over that quarterback position and plays at a much higher level than they did last year. I think Ball State could be a factor. I don't expect them to make a surprise run to the MAC championship, but they could be a team that could play a spoiler in November against a Bowling Green or a Miami. They could be a team that's just a very, very tough out down the stretch, but it's a tough schedule for Ball State. It doesn't set up particularly well, and there's so much turnover, so many question marks. I think the expectation is probably for Ball State to be in that same 4-8 type final record. I think that's probably the most likely expectation. 4-8 last year, 3-5 in the MAC. They're 119th in overall returning production, 129th, like I said, on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's just too many questions to expect a big step forward record-wise. But that is going to wrap it up for us today. A little later, a little longer than usual, but wanted to make sure that we gave all 12 of those spring games their due. Thank you so much to the reporters on the ground bringing us this information. Like I said, I'll dig into the spring games a little bit more in the summer. Especially, the Clemsons, the Auburns, probably have a few more takeaways as we, wrap up the spring across the country. But back on Wednesday, expect that we'll have a lot of discussion of the other scrimmages. I mean, there were, like I said, 2-3 dozen scrimmages across college football on Saturday that we didn't even touch on today. So we'll have more on those plus other news and notes as we get them on episode 34 of Good Morning College Football on Wednesday. Again, I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CampusToCanton.com. Thank you for liking this video, for joining us live, for subscribing to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, and also thank you so much for those of you who have joined us at CampusToCanton.com for as little as $2.99 per month, all the way up to our All-22 and C2C Winning Edge tier packages at the high end of that as well. Thank you, however you're able to support us, whether it's a like, a subscription to the YouTube channel, or by becoming a full-fledged member. We very, very much appreciate it. Hope everyone has a great day, and we will see you next time on Good Morning College Football.